Good evening. I'm Gary Horn. I'm the chairman for the Fire Department Building Committee. I'd like to bring the meeting to order as this is a public meeting. We have a great presentation from Tecton Architects, Rebecca Hopkins, Jack McElrave. How's that, good? That's a tough one. They're going to provide a great presentation tonight. I'll turn it right over to you.
Just wanted to mention, if anyone needs the restrooms, they're right down this hallway on the left. So my name is Rebecca Hopkins. I am an associate at Tecton Architects. With me tonight is Jeff McElravy. He is a principal and the director of the public safety market at Tecton Architects. We have been working together for over 10 years. And Jeff has been working on public safety projects for well over 30 years now. So we're going to dive right into the study. There's kind of two parts that we're going to capture, kind of part one and part two, and we'll kind of walk through the different options that we explored and the ultimate solution that we have been moving forward with. First, the chief is going to touch on the department history and kind of bring everyone up to speed on what the fire department does.
Thank you. For anybody that doesn't know me, my name is Brian Harris. I'm the fire chief for the town of Monson. I've been with the department since 1994 and started full-time in 2006, and here we are today. When Rebecca asked me to talk about the history of the department, I looked at this slide, took a lot of points off of it, and then I started looking through some of our history books at the station and wanted to expand a little bit further on this. In 1715, the first person settled in Monson. Shortly after that, the town started to grow. When we hit 49 families, they decided we need some sort of fire protection because there was nothing for the town. And they formed what was called the Monson Volunteers Association. So that was the informal fire department for the town. The association continued on until 1887 when the select board met and formed the official Monson Fire Department. Moving on in the slide, in 1895, the town occupied two fire stations located at Fountain Street and Main Street. The Main Street site is still standing today. And it's occupied by the dance studio and KBG Construction, owned by Jimmy Kelly. In 1921, the department acquired its first piece of motorized apparatus. Moving forward in time, in 1933, we bought a combination pumper and hose carrier and put it into use. In 1941, the Rotary Club donated a McKesson resuscitator inhaler used for suffocation by smoke, drowning, or other emergencies. In 1941, this was the first time that first aid or EMS would be brought into the Monson Fire Department. In 1951, trucks are now equipped with two-way radios. So prior to having two-way radios, it was just shouting into your officers or your firefighters and saying, this is what we need done. No communications back to our dispatchers. They used to use church bells to alert us of fires. In 1956, a 1948 Packard ambulance is donated to the town by the Rotary Club. Prior to the acquisition, if an ambulance was needed, it came out of Palmer Hospital, which was located on Main Street in Palmer. This was a big advancement for our department. I would probably venture to say for a small town department, we have probably one of the oldest ambulance services going out there. In 1960, Monson Fire Department purchases its first new ambulance. In 1961, the Monson Fire Department holds its first aid class for the public, taught by Andrew PCO. Moving forward to 1978, the existing facility is built. So we lasted almost 100 years in the old building. 1978, we moved into the new building, which replaced a drastically undersized and outdated fire station on Main Street. 1987, town meeting votes to pass two first full-time EMTs employed at the fire station, and the second vote at the same town meeting was to employ the first full-time chief of the fire department. So that moves us up to today. Today, we're in a station that was built for a 100% volunteer fire department. We have 24/7 coverage with career staff at the station. We employ 8 firefighter EMTs or paramedics, a fire chief, and administrative assistant. along with nearly 20 on-call firefighters who respond from home when needed. In the last 136 years since the department has been officially formed, we have seen many technological advances, changes, and demands in the fire service, some of which will be discussed tonight. Many of these changes have required that the fire service adapt and change with it in order to protect our personnel and, most importantly, our citizens. We have come to a point where our fire station is no longer meeting our needs and the need for our service or the community we serve. Now I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
So that was the perfect segue. We're going to dive into the existing conditions assessment as a part of the feasibility study. So essentially, when we look at existing conditions, ourselves and all of our engineers, we're on a much larger team, go out to the station and we look at every system and every component of the construction and look for operational deficiencies or functional deficiencies. So this is not only looking at, do we have leaks in the roof and do we have CMU that's cracking, do we have systems that are out of date, but also looking at operational deficiencies. Are there the proper transition zones and between the hot zone and the cold zone? Are the current best practices from a fire operations standpoint being executed as a part of the station? So we're looking at a few different components when we're out there from an existing conditions standpoint. So a few areas that I'm going to highlight is we looked at non-conforming conditions, structural integrity, health and safety, accessibility, and additional best practices. So we go through each system and each component and we write all of the good things and all of the bad things that we're seeing. And then we took that and kind of put it into a summarized list in different categories so that we could focus on some of the most critical issues. So there are a few non-conforming conditions. To Brian's point, the department has drastically changed over the last 45 to 50 years since it moved into that station, and they've had to make do with the space that they were given. And this has required them to make use of a second story that was really only intended to ever be utility space. And they have a lot of different use and function up there now. So we need to bring that up to the current standards. Structural integrity, we looked at the load capacity on that second floor and the water damage on some of the exterior walls. There's some cracking and the roof is leaking, so we looked at all of that kind of exterior shell construction. From a health and safety standpoint, we focused in on some of those items from a firefighter standpoint that are a little bit more current conversation and haven't always been talked about. But there's a lot of carcinogens and a lot of nasty stuff that comes back from a fire scene. We want to make sure that we're keeping those compartmentalized within the station, and those aren't just being able to go into the office space and into the living spaces. So making sure that there's a proper transition zones between where the apparatus and the firefighters come back and where they do their work on a more daily basis when they're not on a fire scene. We looked at all of the different systems, so emergency lighting, fire alarm. We looked at apparatus bay exhaust, again, really focused in on that health and safety. We looked at all of the support spaces associated with the operation of an apparatus to ensure that there's proper separation between those components on the apparatus bay floor. And making sure that it's easy to operate around those apparatus. We've run some additional studies in the past that show almost 44% of injuries actually do not occur on the scene of a fire. And many of those are tied to operations in the actual station and how you're operating in and around those vehicles. Accessibility, ensuring that it's accessible not only to the public, but that you've got easy access to restrooms and showers, as well as the apparatus bay when you're responding. And those additional best practices that I talked about, we always do like to see some multifunctionality of space. We don't want a space to sit vacant for a long duration of time, but sometimes too much multifunctionality can hinder your operations. So we look at what type of programmatic needs are occurring within a space and should there be some separation there. So from a site layout standpoint, the current fire station exists on a shared lot with the highway, water and sewer, as well as access to some residential and commercial tenants in the rear. So there's a lot of circulation that's occurring on site. From a fire standpoint, as one of the only public safety services that respond from the site, Police departments are slightly different. Most of the time they're responding from the road. So fire station, you're responding from the site. So it's critical that we maintain a clear path for those apparatus to safely exit the site and not cross other public, other trucks that might be circulating in and around that site. That's not only a safety concern for those who are also driving on site, but also just to ensure a timely response. We also noticed there's really minimal parking for the station and call firefighters, so full-time and call, to really support that quick response. And that is really also tied to ensuring that operational safety. Getting to the station and allowing a safe response from the station is all tied together. The main entry is currently concealed kind of on the side of the building, and if you've never been there, it's a little difficult to know where it is, to know where to go. As a fire station, it is common that you have a walk-up medical or someone goes right to the fire station if they can't get to another medical service or hospital. So making sure that that public entry is clear and identifiable and that there's public spaces right in front of it is also a best practice from a fire station standpoint. And I touched on that response route. So that single point of access is another thing we looked at. So it's a single point of access to Main Street. In most public safety facilities, we are looking for at least 2 means off or at least a wide, clear exit way. That ensures that if an event were to occur on Main Street right in front of that intersection or that curb cut, is that the department could still safely get off site, as well as ensuring that, again, that path is clear for their response exiting the site. So from a building exterior, again, we've got the cement block CMU exterior. It's in fair condition, although there is visible cracking, especially kind of on that southern corner. And a lot of that, what we found, is tied to the roof leakage. So the roof is leaking, it's getting into that exterior construction. When I was there on site, I popped a ceiling tile and all of the wood joists going into that exterior wall were all wet. It happened to be a day it was raining, but that's something to be concerned about from an exterior construction standpoint. The doors are not ADA compliant, and there were energy upgrades for the windows would definitely be needed. Main entry, again, it's kind of located unclear off to the side, and it does not really kind of reflect the pride that the department takes in the service they provide to the community. It's right next to all of their utility connections, and again, it's really just a side door. And that is something that we talk many times during programming about, ensuring that the facility supports kind of the pride the department takes and the service that they provide to the community as well. Building interior, so again, a lot of the rooms have multiple uses just due to lack of space. One example of this is the current training room is also the day room, which is also the kitchen, which is also the officer report area, which is also the transition zone into the apparatus bay. So having all of that multifunctionality in one space can be hindersome. Example, our committee holds its meetings in that room. There are firefighters in the rear of the room trying to write reports or maybe use the kitchenette, and that's also the kind of the space that they hang out in as well. So it's that multifunctionality pushes the envelope of when too much program is shoved into one type of space. The second floor, again, we talked about kind of the low ceilings and a lot of those additional uses having to be fit out on that second floor. So for example of what type of space is on that second floor, currently you have living quarters. This is a really low ceiling height, and I'm personally a little tall, but it felt very low to me. It is below the code minimum, so it feels cramped up there. They have living quarters up there. They have office space up there. They have a small fitness area. They have all of their storage for firematic support equipment. They have mechanical equipment. They have lockers for records. So there's a lot of use up there because the space just currently does not exist within the station. Talked about the apparatus bay and kind of the importance of tight operations. So you can see here in a few of these examples how tight these vehicles are parked to the front overhead doors, to all of the equipment that lines the entire apparatus bay floor. You can see that even portions of the bays have had to, they've had to take up for equipment. This is all the turnout gear. They've got SCBA fill stations, which is where they're filling their oxygen tanks out on the apparatus bay floor, that is one of those support functions that we do not want to see within that hot zone. We want that as a separate space, isolated from a ventilation standpoint, so you don't get any of that cross-contamination. Same with the turnout gear. That's the clean gear that you're putting on your body. That should not be sitting out within the bay. So another thing we noticed here is not only the close quarters and operations around the vehicles, but also getting separate support spaces for those different operational support items. Okay. Oh, I just want to mention one more thing. Most of the bays are not drive-through bays. So if you notice on the front of the station, there are multiple overhead doors. On the rear of the station, there are 2 overhead doors. So most of the rear of so I think 2 or 3 bays are not overhead, are not drive-through bays. So there's support spaces behind them. It also requires kind of moving around of vehicles and equipment to get anything out. So there is kind of different approaches to response, and whether you can get, back-to-back approaches so you can actually respond out of the rear of the station, but that requires that response route to not come out straight out the front. You've got to kind of loop around the back. So again, just thinking about how the total operation works on site and kind of how that flow within the bays is working as well. And that's important because there's a lot of different types of calls that the fire department is responding to. They need different types of equipment to respond, and that kind of configuration plays again into that quick response to site. So the first part of this study really focused on a big picture, total program, part 1 and part 2. So part 1 was really if we go with a full programmatic need, what would an addition renovation solution look like, and what would a new construction solution look like? Both of these we were presented to the select board and just seemed to be too much for the town to digest. It was a large investment, and we were asked to kind of come back for a part 2 and look at prioritizing the program and coming back with some more financially feasible options. But I did want to touch on the 2 options that were created. So option 1 was an addition renovation. At the time, the space needs was about 20,000 square feet total. And at the time, the probable cost was about $15.9 million. So it was a big number for the town to digest. This was a rendering of what that looked like. You can kind of see that existing station was right here in the middle. We were putting a addition over on the side here. This was going to give proper apparatus bays at the current best standards to the current size in a drive-through configuration with support space, as well as a large 2-story addition to really pull all of that office functionality, living accommodations, and fires, again, more support space along the apparatus bay out of their current footprint. We're also reworking the site to supplement with parking and kind of coordinate with a few of the other cut-throughs that existed, but really pull the firematic response away from that other public circulation and give a clearer route off-site. Option 2 looked at a new construction. Again, the space needs was around 19,400. Whenever you do a new construction, you're always going to be a little more efficient because you can kind of create your envelope and create your footprint. When you're working within an existing conditions or within an existing building, you kind of are working within the constraints you have. So there is a little less efficiency because you don't want to tear out everything, because at that point it usually is more cost effective to just build new. So you're trying to save and reutilize what you have there. So this one was slightly smaller at 19,400, but the total project cost sat around 16.1. We were aware of the environmental concerns on this site. An additional investigation would be necessary, but something we had dealt with in the past for other municipalities. But again, the costs were pretty similar, but again, very, very large price points. So we looked back, so as a part of part 2, we really looked at that program. So again, the total space needs as a part of part 1 was 22,590 square feet. So in those 2 previous schemes, we're sitting right around that 20,000 square foot mark. The site needs sitting around 1.58 usable acres. So when you take that and you compare it to the existing site, you've got already a lot of existing constraints. And what our program was telling us after discussion with the department is that would be our site needs and our space needs. And one thing to note is that program allocation, we do a study that looks at what makes up most of that program. When you think 22,000 square feet, that can seem like a big number. Well, about 60% of that is mission critical space, which means it's space directly tied to their operations. Apparatus bay, firematic support spaces. It's not offices. It's not those types of spaces. So that has less flexibility because their size is very much determined by the current equipment owned by the town and all of those different components of their operation. Now, 27% of that is the building, what we like to call is basically what makes the building work. So it's the wall thicknesses, the corridor spaces, it's the mechanical space, the electrical space. It's all the spaces that are necessary to create a functioning building. And then only 14% of that was actually office space. So again, just kind of giving you a feel for what, if you take that 22,000 square feet and break it up, what were the main components? So when we jumped into this part 2 exercise of prioritization, we were really focused on that 60% because that was really tied the most heavily to the operational needs of the department. So in going through this exercise, we determined 9 priorities. We met with the full department multiple times, kind of looked through the list of needs. We said, okay, if you could get one thing, what would it be? If you could get 2 things, what would it be? If we could solve one problem, what would you want us to focus on? And we really worked towards a list of priorities and then leveraged that in creating options that solved those different priorities in different combinations. So the priorities determined were decontamination was number 1. So it goes back to that officer health and safety. The firefighters wanted to ensure that what they're bringing back from the site is left in the bays and there's proper separation to where they're living and they're working. Living quarters, proper living quarters to support that operation in the full-time department. The locker shower room configuration, again, making sure that they can clean themselves off, they can down their gear effectively, and that they can move seamlessly from the hot zone to the cold zone. Bay congestion and bay quantity. So again, giving proper space for those apparatus vehicles, as well as the number of spaces. They currently have existing equipment that sits outside as town assets. They deteriorate at a higher rate when they're outside in the exterior, not protected from the elements. So getting all of the current equipment inside of a bay. Separate training and classroom space. I talked about that multi-function report room, training room, kitchen, day room, separating out that training classroom function, not only to support community meeting needs, but also to support the many trainings that the department hosts for either the community or internal training themselves. Fire departments many times will do classroom style training, and training is a really important element of a functioning fire department. The classroom style training is key, but also actual physical training with the apparatus, doing different drills. And many times we look to leverage the apparatus bay. If we build new apparatus bays, we have those heights, so we look to leverage that from an internal training standpoint. To again allow for that maximum training opportunities within the built environment. A separate public entry, additional administrative space, and additional adjacent storage space. And that really gets back to that firematic support space, making sure that those storage needs are right proximate to the base. So reducing the program based on those top priorities, we came up with about 10 plus solutions with multiple different configurations. And kind of a wide range of building sizes. So what did those look like? So we had the first 2 options, which we talked about previously as a part of part 1, and then we came up with option A through H. Previously, these prices, so part 1 was escalated to the fall of 2022, and part 2 was escalated to the spring of 2023, and I'll talk about the importance of escalation. The current numbers reflected here are escalated to the fall of 2024, which reflects the current project schedule. I'll talk about how that escalation changes and how that affects the total project cost and what that total project cost is comprised of. But for the time being, just to recap what the options included. So again, option 1 and 2 we aren't really talking about because that was part of part 1 of the study. So focusing on option A through H. So A was just a addition renovation, or an immediate needs only, I apologize. Option A was immediate needs only. It was really to focus on all of those high priority items that came out of that existing conditions assessment. Let's fix the exterior wall damage. Let's fix the egress from the second floor. So really didn't meet many of the priorities. It didn't meet any of the priorities on that previous list. So really no square footage change, just fix, Band-Aid the problems that existed within the station. B is a single-story addition. C is a single-story addition plus a small bay. And then we had a slight variation on C, which was plus a medium-sized bay. D was a two-story addition. E was the two-story addition plus a medium bay. And then F, we were asked to explore a pre-engineered building at the full program. So again, that was a pre-engineered apparatus bay with a wood-framed construction for the kind of office administrative portion of the building, just to explore different construction types. So that was option F, but again, that was to the full programmatic needs, where options A through E were really focused on those priorities. And then option G and H were just additional components that could be combined with any of those previous options. So G was, a small single-story standalone, kind of what you'd, more like a Quonset hut would hold like a piece or two of equipment, and then an outbuilding, so that would hold a little bit more than just a single bay. So it was really just small additions that could be added on to a few of those other options. So we really focused in as a committee on, the different priorities that were being met with each one. And we have a much longer presentation that goes through each individual option, how many different priorities they meet, and the kind of the solution presented, but we're gonna focus in on one. So again, these are all the options here on the left. These were the different design solutions. We looked at the total square footage being provided. We looked at the estimated cost. We looked at the lifespan. And from a lifespan standpoint, we're not so much saying that in 15 years, this building is going to fall down. We're saying in 15 years, this building programmatically may not support the department's growth, because we're only meeting certain needs today. So when we talk about lifespan, we're talking more about how far into the future is this building gonna support the department without needing a potential addition or without needing renovations. And mostly additions in this case, because it really comes down to a space need. And then the priority list, when we looked at the items to be resolved, we talked about, that A is really just fixes, immediate improvements only, so it doesn't meet any of the priorities listed. And then as you go through, we meet, 5 to 9 of those priorities in A through F. So option E became the preferred option of the committee and the option that the select board supported in us moving forward with. So this would include, and I'm going to dive deeper into option E, but that again was a two-story addition on one side of the existing station and a medium bay addition on the other side of the existing station. So this just recaps kind of those immediate improvements that we're currently pursuing and was previously approved at Springtown meeting for the department and town to move forward with. So again, it does not renovate or build any new programmatic area. It does not address any of the challenges or operational needs. It's really just, it's being implemented due to the urgency of the need and also to repair that existing town asset. So option E. So this is the option we're currently moving forward with. So we've got a two-story addition located here. You've got the existing station located here in the center, and then you've got this medium bay addition here to the side. So this two-story addition is around 5,500 square feet. You've got a renovation of the main floor of the existing station. So there's about 1,800 square feet of office type space. That's their office, bathrooms, radio, training, kitchen, day, dining, report. Basically that whole main floor comprises this area of the building here. And then the apparatus bays themselves. So we'd renovate those slightly. And then we'd have the medium bay addition at the end. So from a cost standpoint and from a lifespan standpoint and a need standpoint, so escalated according to our new schedule, the price is sitting at $6.6 million for this solution, total project cost. And that would support the department for the next 30 to 35 years. The full program that we had previously presented would support the department for 50 plus years. So that gives you the difference of time spans that we were looking at. We were looking at what will support them for the next 5 to 10 years, all the way up to 50 plus years. From a needs standpoint, this solution did meet all 9 priorities. It did not meet the full programmatic ask from part 1, but it did meet all of the 9 priorities identified as a part of the part 2 of the study. Again, those priorities being it solved the decontamination, solved the living quarters, it created a proper locker room, shower room area, it resolved bay congestion by adding on some additional bay space, and bay quantity by allowing some of that equipment to swing inside. Now it doesn't upgrade and resize any of the existing bays, so all of the existing bays remain as is, but there is one additional bay that would be sized appropriately, as well as pulling all of that firematic space out of the bay to increase that circulation zone around the existing equipment. Separates out the training classroom area and a separate public entry, as well as some additional administrative space and adjacent storage. So, from a floor plan standpoint, I know this is a little small on your screen, so I'm going to walk up and try to be able to use the laser pointer to walk everyone through it. So the main entry, so this is kind of the face that everyone sees when you pull into the campus, is at the bottom of the page. The existing station is this kind of gray tone box that sits right in the middle of this floor plan. As you walk in this main entry area, you've got an administrative assistant, and you've got 2 supporting offices off to the left. This would be for your deputy chief and your chief. As you come in, you've kind of greeted by a circulation stair that would go up into, again, this is that 2-story addition, so that would go up into all of your living quarter spaces and kind of those office accommodations. If you kind of come into the station, you have an elevator that would also, again, making sure that the station is fully accessible, would lead you upstairs, as well as some additional storage support space adjacent. But at the end of the hall, you have that separate community classroom training space that could be utilized for all of those different functions that we discussed earlier. If you were to come back to the main lobby and turn to the right, this would be more in support of the operations. So you've got your day captain's office, you've got your radio room, then you've got some supporting public toilets, as well as some toilet shower rooms that are immediately adjacent to a proper turnout gear space. So this footprint right here, where you see these lockers, is actually the existing classroom training room space. So we're taking all of those turnout gears, lockers that sit out on the bay and take up a full parking stall, and moving them into a proper separated turnout gear space. Again, this space would act as that transition zone. If you're a call firefighter and you're coming in, you could immediately respond into that, grab your gear, and respond to the appropriate vehicle. This space, again, from a pressurization standpoint, would keep all of the contaminants within the bay and would help us control that flow of carcinogens from this space into the clean space. And when we talk about the cold zone, we're really talking about office space and living quarters. So we've utilized this existing footprint to kind of create that separation, and this space would really act as that clean zone. You can see that's why there's a degree of separation here, because we have office functions off of this rear corridor. So this will act as a transition zone itself, and so will this space here. So really, again, creating a full transition between the hot zone and the cold zone, and getting all of the proper facilities and accommodations right immediately adjacent to that. We're also including a personal decon area, so that if you do have something on your personal body, you can decon that here, you can down that gear. We talk about equipment decontamination, which is slightly different over here, but really, again, making sure that we are prioritizing that health and safety of the firefighters. We've identified all of the different current pieces of equipment that would sit within the bays. We're maximizing, although these bay footprints from a width standpoint, from a length standpoint, and from a height standpoint are all under the current best practices, we're trying to maximize the ability to utilize them safely. So we're removing all of that firematic support equipment and all of those storage needs that are currently being met by just lining the walls of this bay. We're pulling them out into separate support spaces which are kind of denoted here. So you've got SCBA, so you're pulling all of that bottle fill, the oxygen tanks off of the floor into a separate space. You're pulling decontamination off of the floor where your gear extractor would exist, your dehydrator, all of the equipment that really allows you to properly extract all those contaminants from the gear itself, as well as you've got some additional firematic equipment storage, you've got some workroom space, EMS equipment, and firematic equipment right adjacent to the bays. So if you need to grab something for the ambulance, you can grab it right there, versus now you've got to go all the way upstairs into that utility unfinished attic space to try to get that equipment. So it'd be right approximate to the apparatus. To the right here is that medium bay addition. You've got one full-size bay here. So again, this is meeting those proper widths and proper lengths for much larger pieces of equipment, but also just for the proper circulation needed around these pieces of equipment. Overhead doors now typically are 14 by 14, height versus width, again, to ensure that you do not have to customize your apparatus. Many times that can drive up cost when you have to customize apparatus in order to fit them into your existing station. So that would allow equipment to be purchased, and you could leverage this bay kind of at that standard price point. We are including an overhead door to bring in equipment kind of on the side here, as well as the ability to potentially include mezzanine space. Again, you're creating that height just due to the best practices around the apparatus. That gives us the ability to create some mezzanine space, which can be leveraged for storage and or training. And again, you're really just paying for a floor at that point because you've already have to pay for the height and the envelope necessary to house the apparatus. Kind of on the back side here, and this would be on the rear side of the facility, we're creating kind of a separate apparatus bay, so it's kind of all a part of this medium apparatus bay addition, but this will house a lot of that equipment that's sitting outside, or we've been able to shuffle that in here and pull that into this portion of the bay. So you've got some forestry and some other types of maybe secondary equipment that isn't utilized as much as these frontline vehicles denoted here. Up on the second floor, so again, up on the second floor here, you can see this mezzanine here between. You've got open to below here, open to below here. This is that separation that we've created with the addition. So this would be the second floor of the office living quarters addition, and then that existing kind of what was always supposed to be a storage mezzanine, mechanical mezzanine, would go back to being that type of space. So it would just house all of that utility storage, necessary mechanical equipment necessary to properly ventilate and exhaust this space, as well as support the new addition. So when you come up that stair, you remember the stair and elevator on the first floor, so when you come up, you're kind of in this smaller vestibule area. When you come in, again, we've separated out all of those report functions, kitchen functions, day room functions, dining functions out of the training classroom area, and that's a separate space here. And then kind of just adjacent to that, you have 4 bunk rooms, which is what meets the current need of the department, as well as 2 supporting toilet spaces. So these are kind of just like what you'd have at your house. It's a toilet, a shower, and a sink, and they're unisex, so that limits the amount of fixtures that are necessary. So any firefighter staying in these bunk rooms could utilize either one of those shower facilities. And then a small fitness area to kind of relocate their existing equipment and give that a proper home for, again, a lot of that training and exercise. So from an exterior standpoint, again, this is looking at the front of the station. So this is that existing portion here, the overhead doors that exist today. This would be that medium bay addition. You can see the height differential between this type of bay and this bay here, as well as the 2-story addition. From a materials standpoint, we are again looking to be financially responsible, but as well as thinking about durability and maintenance. Whenever we're designing a municipal facility, we're going to be very conscious of how long are these materials going to last. They need to last just as long as the facility supports the department, as well as making sure that the maintenance on them isn't a high load or a heavy lift for the town to accommodate. So we're looking at a cementitious siding, so similar to what you'd have on your house, but it's a little bit more durable on this addition here with some punched windows, fixed windows here, and then just trying to kind of clean up and veneer the exterior of the existing building to try to tie it into that So we've got CMU construction. CMU construction is actually typically our main backup wall system for a new facility we would build. So you have all the durability on the inside, but we fur that out with exterior materials, proper installation so that you can meet the current energy codes in place in Massachusetts. We would go with more of a traditional block construction for the apparatus-based space, again, to just be financially responsible and kind of minimize the need on the rear side of the site. So it just gives you an idea of what this could look like. We would obviously have some punch windows that kind of would circulate around to tie with some of those, but we just wanted to give you a quick visualization of what that would look like. So we now can dive into the cost. So it's a 2-story addition. So option E is a 2-story addition plus a medium apparatus bay. So the total square footage for the entire solution is 17,200 square feet. Now that includes space we're not touching, but that's the total existing building plus the additions. So we have the new addition, which is the 5,500 square feet. That's the 2-story kind of office living quarters addition. We then have a renovation of the existing portion of the building on that first floor, so that's about 1,800 square feet. And then we'll renovate the existing apparatus bays, clean them up, and ensure the finishes again are of that same durability and maintenance that we're looking for in the rest of the facility. We're going to have to handle exhaust and a few other improvements to the systems. So there's about 4,500 square feet of existing bay space. The existing utility mezzanine is really to remain. We're not touching that. We would just be removing the programmatic elements from it. And then the new medium apparatus bay addition of 3,600 square feet. So when we look at an opinion of probable cost, we look at 3 different buckets of money because we always want to talk about the total project cost. The first bucket is your construction costs. So that's your brick and mortar. That's the number that you'd receive from your general contractor. That's your bid number, essentially. Now that number has a lot of different pieces to it, but that's your hard construction costs. You then have all of your what we call soft costs. They're the project development costs, the equipment costs, everything else that is necessary to make a project happen. That not only includes any of your professional fees, it includes material testing during construction, it includes an FF&E budget to make sure that you've got desks and chairs in the spaces that you've just fit out. It includes surveys and borings, MEP commissioning, things of that nature. All of those additional fees that can kind of add up but are very necessary to execute a construction of this type. So we call that project development and equipment costs, and that's kind of this second section here. And then the third section that we incorporate into that total project budget is contingency. So we will take a certain percentage and we will apply a contingency to the construction cost and to the project development costs. And there's a few reasons for that. One, we understand as a municipal facility that you go and you ask for money once. There's no going back to the well. So you need to ensure that the project budget has some room for the unknowns within the construction process. So there's a bit of that in here to ensure that we can fully execute the contract given this total project cost. There's also, from a hard construction cost standpoint, there's unforeseens. We might come across something, especially in a renovation, that we were unaware of, that might drive up cost or create a change order. We may need to change something in the field, which will have a slight markup on it. So that allows us to execute those during the construction process, during the administration of that contract, again, just pulling from that contingency bucket. And from a project development standpoint, there's contingencies on that because many times these are not actual received quotes. They are just allowances. They are budgets for furniture, but we need to go actually get a quote for different furniture packages, or we need to actually go get a contract or a proposal for a MEP commissioning agent. So they're again allowing for some flexibility in these numbers. We're accounting for phones and computers and different technology to be included, but we don't know the exact number of that quote. So that gives us some flexibility in executing that. It also can include your bidding expenses and your utility back charges. Again, we'll get more specific information as we go through the process, but we always like to keep a contingency on both of those budgets. So just to dive a little bit further into the hard costs. So from a hard cost standpoint, we're going to carry a cost per square foot for not only the new construction, but for the renovation, as well as any additional costs that the general contractor would carry. So that would include any demolition, any utility connections, any temporary operations or structures. So we're currently proposing a renovation to the existing station, but the department needs to remain operational during that construction. Where do they go? And we need to ensure that we're accounting for that not only in our construction schedule, but also within our project cost, because those structures do cost money. So we did ensure that we included those items all kind of above this line. And that brings us to a kind of a hard cost. And then there's the general conditions, overhead, bonds and insurance, all of the markups that a general contractor will put on all of those hard costs received from his filed subbidders and from his own scope. And that brings you to a total project cost, which in this case is sitting right around $4.2 million. But then we're really early on in the process, right? This is a conceptual design. We did a programming feasibility study. We need to go through a schematic design, design development, construction documentation. There's a lot of development, a lot of documentation that needs to happen. So we carry a contingency, which we call a design and estimating contingency. When we're applying these costs per square foot, and we did send this to a third-party estimator, and that's really important. We don't generate our own costs per square foot. We send it to a third party who knows the market more intimately than we do. It also protects us from trying to work to a number that we want to see. So it's really that third party, separate opinion of what he thinks or she thinks that the cost could be. And there's a lot of assumptions being made at this point. So we always want to carry that design and estimating contingency because there's a lot of unknowns. So that is then usually just rolled into that project cost. And then this more important line item, which is the reason for some of the changes in costs between the part 2 of the study's completion and today, is an escalation allowance to the midpoint of construction. So an escalation allowance, it doesn't go to the day you build it, and it can't be just to today, because the project is going to be built in a year and a half. So you want to ensure that you're accounting for the change in price from today until that point. So escalation allowance to the midpoint of construction currently assumes a project start date of April 1st, 2024. So next spring. And I have a project schedule here, and I'll talk about the steps that are required to get there and why we've kind of come to that date. So it assumes a project start of this in the spring of 2024. We're assuming a project duration of about 12 months, so about a year. So that midpoint would put us in the fall of 2024. So that is 21 months from today that we have to escalate for cost changes. The market in the past few years has been a little bit more volatile than previously, just due to the pandemic, due to impacts to supply chain, to material just cost increases. You can see it when you're at Home Depot, the price of lumber. That also was being seen in the construction, in the commercial field of construction, and something we've been kind of tracking very closely over the last 2 years. We've seen generally a leveling out of that escalation, so it's not, escalating at as high of a rate as it was. But it still escalates. So one thing we do like to talk about is that it's very rare for costs to come down. And it's only happened a few times, and typically it's right before a recession. So if you see extreme escalation in the market, like we saw kind of in 2020, 2021, while the pandemic was really affecting those supply chain portions of the construction process, typically it's not going to just drop or come back down. It's just going to stop escalating to such an extreme and just start escalating at the rate it typically escalates at. So we've seen a little bit of that leveling out. So we're currently carrying that current percentage over the next 21 months. Now, no one has a crystal ball. It could change over those next few months, but we want to ensure we're accounting for that escalation nonetheless. We have had a few instances where you get lucky on bid day, you get some really hungry contractors, or that escalation has kind of come down, you get a good number. This estimate is always intended to be the middle bid. It's never intended to be the low bid, it's never intended to be the high bid. It's that conservative middle. So we're trying to hit kind of that fair opinion of probable cost. So again, just recapping those options that we reviewed. So focusing in on option E. So project schedule. So project schedule, next steps. So over the next few months, the committee has determined a few different community outreach presentation dates. We are looking to do a community presentation every month, once a month, up until the May Springtown meeting. And I've got the date of the next one in February, but they'll be at different locations, different days of the week, different times to ensure kind of maximum accessibility for the community. So we're going to be doing that for the next 4 or 5 months, and then kind of working towards the 2023 annual Springtown meeting and subsequent debt exclusion ballot vote, if approved. If we were to be approved at the Springtown meeting and via the ballot vote, we would move immediately into the design phases. And again, I'll mention some of the importance of moving, if possible, moving quickly through those design phases. It says the longer it takes us to document, the further out the escalation pushes. So there's very much a trickle-down effect when it comes to schedule management and budget management. So design development, again, would occur kind of the 3 months following, or I would say, yes, I've got some date. Yeah, 3 months following, so June through September, we'll call it, June, July, August, to get us to the beginning of September. And again, that's given the ballot vote approval, that's gonna move a little bit given all of those executions. And then construction documents would come immediately following that. We then would be required to do a bidder pre-qualification because of the size. Actually, no, I don't think we would be. No, we wouldn't have to. So this solution is under $10 million, so we actually wouldn't have to do a bidder pre-qualification. In the state of Massachusetts, if you're over $10 million, you have to do bidder pre-qualification, which essentially ensures that anyone who's bidding on the project, general contractor or filed sub-bidder, meets all of the requirements to be able to build a project of that size and complexity. So in this case, we would have a more opened invitation to bid. Now they would still have all of the state requirements to meet, but we don't have to go through that pre-qualification process, which would limit the list of invited bidders. So in this case, we could immediately advertise once we completed the construction documentation. From a scheduling standpoint, that doesn't affect us because we always overlap pre-qualification with documentation. So the documentation would complete, we would be able to advertise the project, bid the project, and be ready to start construction in April of 2024. So really that shows you kind of all of the different steps necessary to get us ready to execute, the town ready to execute a contract, and then begin construction for the following year. One thing that we will want to focus in on in the future if the project is approved is how we handle those temporary operations. We will want to ensure that the department is out of the building, operating out of those temporary structures prior to construction starting to ensure we are limiting the impact on general conditions. So something we actually looked at as a part of part 1 of the study was in part 1, the reason behind a new construction option and an addition renovation is that a new construction allows current operations to remain as they exist today untouched. So it does not increase the need for extended general conditions because you're not extending the construction schedule or the construction period. Essentially, when you're moving people around from portions of the site or continuing to operate while you're renovating, it adds challenges, complexities, and duration to the overall project schedule and timeline. It is something that the committee looked at quite extensively in all of these different options to ensure that they're not taking on, not required costs in any of the solutions. If there was a way around that or an alternate that made that a little bit more feasible. So that would again put us at a construction start of next April if the project were to go through the annual Springtown meeting this year. So again, it's the recommendation of the Building Assessment Committee and the Select Board to proceed with option E, although we are looking at all of the different options, and these options have been presented to the Finance Committee as well as the Select Board, and the committee intends to continue to keep those committees and boards updated on our progress, as well as share all the information that we shared with the public tonight. Our next steps is really take that cost and dive into working with the finance director, what is the taxpayer impact per household? What does that mean to me? What does that mean to my taxes? And give some additional insight on how that potentially could be financed for the town. I mentioned community outreach events, so again, we're gonna do one a month. Our next one is February 9th at 12:30 at the Monson Senior Center. So it's a lunchtime event on Thursday, and that will kind of be a part 2 to this. And we will continue to supplement with this information as the committee continues to develop it. And again, kind of working towards that eventual annual Springtown meeting. So with that, I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, or if you have the chief would like to add a few thoughts. So I'll invite you up if you want to. Sure.
That's fine. So I just wanted to talk real quick about option A. When we first looked at the repairs to the station, the price tag was actually around $700,000. That's just the Band-Aid repairs, not fixing any of the priorities. When we met and discussed this, we really dialed that back to the $200,000 number you see, because we didn't want to go and make repairs that might get taken out down the road if we do an option. So, down the road, if we don't pass a program, then those repairs would have to be made, and those have not been escalated out. So I would assume every day we go on, it gets closer and closer to $1 million. If you can go back to the first floor, please. So one thing we didn't talk about is in the training room. Currently, the town has what's called an EOC. It's an Emergency Operations Center, and that's located at 110 Main Street in the Select Board meeting room. After the tornado took out that building and they rebuilt it, there was plans to have a full-blown, up-to-date EOC in there. As that building progressed, I think many of us remember that budget was drastically cut, and they pretty much cut the EOC. There's one radio hookup in there and one phone hookup in there. It is not properly designed for an EOC. When we were looking at this building, we also asked the architects to make that training room a multi-function room and a fully functioning EOC. So EOC was used during the tornado, severe snowstorms, flooding, where we have multiple agencies, sometimes up to a dozen or more calls going at once. Police chief would be in there, fire chief, highway surveyor, town administrator, and we would coordinate the event together. One other thing that was asked at the previous meeting that I just wanted to touch on, and maybe one of your questions, is it was asked at the October meeting why the one size that fits all room wasn't adequate. Why couldn't we go with a 1-story addition over the 2-story addition? As Rebecca stated, we're hosting many meetings down at the station. We have our building committee meetings, we have fire department trainings, we have Girl Scouts, we have Boy Scouts, Summerfest committee, Lakeshore, the Lakeshore Association, a bunch of civic groups that come and meet there. And we love having people, and we would love to host as many meetings as we can. The problem is, when those meetings are taking places, our full-time staff, even our on-call staff, when they come back for calls, we have no place to do our work. So the current model isn't working now, so it's not going to work in the future. That was definitely one question that was asked at the last meeting, and I just wanted to comment on those.
Were there any other questions? Good.
One of the things after you build it, you have to maintain it, you have operating costs. Are they ever looking at rooftop solar, electrical usage would come back and with the drying equipment and everything? What happened to that?
So I'm just going to repeat the question for the recording. So we were talking about after the project is built, and make sure that I repeat this correctly. After the project is built is the operation and maintenance cost of the facility and the potential use of solar panels to offset some of those utility costs on the roof. So in this case, the building structure itself is not being looked at for solar on the roof. That is not to say that it couldn't be. It is a very common request, especially nowadays, that we are looking at. Not so much the inclusion of the solar panels, but to ensure that the building is solar ready, so that all of the infrastructure necessary for the solar could be in place and that the electrical system is there to support that future solar. So there are a lot of different procurement options for solar panels. You can partner with a lease agreement with other different companies versus purchasing them outright as a part of the project. And again, there's a lot of different pros and cons to all of those different approaches. So it is something that we could look at. It's currently not included in this solution from an infrastructure standpoint, but it is a common request.
Just one clarification. The existing roof is currently not being looked at for the solar capacity. The code now requires us to do all new roofs with the capacity to support solar. So that is an option from that standpoint.
Yeah, I should clarify structural capacity versus electrical capacity, and the existing roof versus the new roof. So if that's something that community and the town felt strongly about, it is something that we could continue to explore and ensuring that the infrastructure is there to support that future installation. Yes, absolutely.
So while the construction is going on, as you will have to leave this building, will they be renting trailers?
So the current
Will there be a cost for trailers?
Yes. So just to repeat the question is, while the construction is going on, will they have to leave the station? Will they be renting trailers, and the cost for those trailers, and what does those temporary operations look like? So during construction, we are currently carrying temporary structures. We have seen changes in the costs for those temporary structures over the past few years, and the different price points on whether purchasing or leasing makes the most sense. We are currently carrying an allowance for temporary structures, and these would really be to just move their office and living accommodations out of the station. So this is more of what you'd imagine as like a mobile trailer would look like. They are a little larger than a construction trailer, for example, but it would have all of their office needs would be in those spaces and the living quarters and facilities, but the bays would have to remain operational. We have looked at, and we have performed this for a number of different departments on, what is the cost if I'm constructing in the winter, if I leave the apparatus outside running, what's the cost of that versus renting a tented structure that I've got to heat, that I've got to house existing apparatus temporarily. Those costs can be large. So looking at all of those different options will be a part of the continued design process. But currently there is an allowance for temporary structures really to move the manned spaces out of the station, but the vehicles would remain operational from the bays.
And I'll just point out with the apparatus bay addition that we're proposing here on the right, you have the opportunity of getting that constructed, relocating some vehicles into that structure as you complete the work in the existing bays. So there's a little bit of phasing and a little bit of relocating that happens simultaneously.
Absolutely.
I was the town accountant in Wilbraham.
Oh, okay.
So I was involved with that fire station
Yep.
there. And I was just curious, what is the difference in square feet from Wilbraham and Monson? Do you know
Since Jeff worked on it, I'll let him answer that question.
Wow, you're pressing my memory. That's, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago now. I think this building is a little bit bigger than what was in Wilbraham, but for a very specific reason. Because at the time of Wilbraham, the industry knowledge about the importance of transition zones was really not in place. That's come actually around in the industry since that time. When the first fire station I did, which goes back 36 years, although Rebecca was generous and said it was only 30, we had no transition zones at all. You walked right from the living quarters into the apparatus bay. And the fire service has changed a lot. There's been a lot of research out there that has begun to understand the risk of injury to firefighters, but also the health risks associated with the job. And so there's been a lot of changes to address that. Bay size is one of those that Rebecca talked about in her presentation, but also understanding that we need to transition from where the risks are associated with the apparatus into the clean spaces of the building. And that's all changed since the time of Wilbraham. So we see a lot more transition area in this plan than we did there.
I just wanted to ask the chief, how many men do you have per shift?
So currently, we have 2 firefighters per shift, plus myself and an administrative assistant during the day,
So 2 men per shift, and those are also paramedics?
or EMTs, correct. We do have a plan in place where we were trying to go to a 3rd per shift. That's kind of on hold right now. 1 shift did go to 3, so I have 1 shift with 3, 2 shifts with 2.
And also, if I could just mention, Wilbraham, when you're comparing square footage, they have 2 stations. So if you put all that together, it's
Well,
one
that's true, they have that little one, that's true.
So the point was just made when looking and comparing it to Wilbraham. Wilbraham does have 2 stations compared to Monson having 1. Any additional questions? Oh, follow-up, absolutely.
So I have a follow-up to the question about the trailers.
Oh, yes.
So as Jeff was saying, when we do the addition to the apparatus space, we might be able to move apparatus around. So I envision this question might come up again in the future. Would it be possible to build the new addition on the left, move staffing over there, and then eliminate the trailers? Sure.
Do you currently have any vehicles that are left outside now?
Yes.
We have one brush, make it up here so you can hear me. We have 1 brush truck, 1 trailer with a UTV inside of it, a pickup truck, and then the chief's car all sit outside.
They all sit outside?
Yes.
Are they fairly new vehicles?
The brush truck is a government surplus vehicle that we acquired for free. We put about $20,000 into it to convert it into said brush truck. The pickup truck is a 2015 that was roughly $40,000. My vehicle is a 2020, and that was roughly $45,000. The trailer and the UTV are about 2003, and those are on the schedule to be replaced with ARPA funds. We have 2.
2 vehicles?
Yep,
And they're all in the garage?
correct.
So all of this will house everything?
It would get every single piece of equipment inside, correct.
And you're happy with the sizes of those existing doors?
We can't change them,
You just cannot
Yeah.
combine those?
not unless you knock the building down and redid it, which would be back to the 16 million.
I see.
So I wanted to address the second part of the chief's question, passed along relative to the temporary structures and temporary operation. So one thing that we were being conscientious of, and it is again something we're going to continue to look at as we go through, if approved, as we go through the process, is that all of the building or most of the building utility connections come in through the left side of this building. So it would limit our ability to build that addition prior to the shutdown of the existing station because we'd be interrupting service to the rest of the station. Now, with that being said, we're going to explore every option. So if we need to look at, to Jeff's point, kind of some phasing of can we finish the bay and can we kind of support that space through some type of temporary connection, we're going to be looking at that kind of cost benefit of does it buy us time, but does it cost us additional money up front, et cetera. So that was the main driving factor behind not building this addition. First to move everybody out is because of all of those building connections coming in through that side of the building. But again, something that we're going to look at holistically throughout the process. We don't want to necessarily pay for temporary utilities and the maintenance of those while we're in construction. That can also get costly. So trying to balance all of those kind of different moving pieces as we kind of come to a final kind of construction phasing and construction schedule. Yes?
You act as the construction supervisor as well?
I'll let Jeff answer that one.
Yeah, I want to be very careful about the terms. I mean,
Yes.
it is our role as the project architect, as well as all of our engineers, to be the observers of the construction and the enforcers of the compliance with the construction documents. So the contractor, the general contractor, will have their own foreman, their own project manager, their own superintendent, and we will meet with them on a frequent basis, sometimes as often as weekly, to review the progress of construction and make sure it's in conformance. I will tell you that in the years that I've been doing this, that we find that if we can build a great partnership with the contractor, we can make it better for the community because we can escalate the process, reduce the number of change orders, and of course build a more cooperative relationship with the contractor. So that's something we strive for all the time. But at the end of the day, the contract is the contract, and it's our job to make sure it's enforced. Yes, you will be required to have an owner's project manager as part of that process as well.
Is this all you do, public safety buildings?
This is the vast majority of my entire career. I've done a few other buildings along the way, but I've got way over 100 public safety buildings on my resume at this point. So yeah, this is my bread and butter. And I'll tell you the reason why is because I really care about the work that happens here. You know, I didn't leave architecture school to become a public safety specialist. It's something that I encountered on my second job out of college. And I've seen some really good departments working out of really rough facilities. And so I honestly believe that, you know, it's sort of my mission to try to find the opportunity to make better working conditions for the people that are out there looking after our welfare. So, thank you.
Hearing no additional, yeah, maybe? No? Anybody? Okay. All right, hearing no additional questions, we thank everyone for their time this evening. Again, our next community presentation will be on February 9th at 12:30 at the Monson Senior Center. Thank you again. Have a great night.